Russia's economy is under its longest recorded stock market slide, with 19 consecutive weeks of decline and an estimated 30% loss in market value since early April. Now, according to the data provided, the Kremlin is considering redirecting nearly $40 billion in private pension assets while regional healthcare budgets are being cut. Those are no longer isolated warning signs. They are pieces of the same economic story. For years, Russia projected an image of economic resilience despite the pressures of war. But the information now emerging points to mounting strain beneath that narrative. At the same time these financial pressures are intensifying, Ukraine is expanding defense cooperation with the United Kingdom and moving beyond simply receiving military aid. The focus has shifted toward joint production, technology sharing, and long-term industrial partnerships. According to the information provided, political change in London has not altered Britain's position. Prime Minister Andy Burnham reaffirmed that support for Ukraine would continue, calling it both the right and necessary course of action. British media also reached the same conclusion, reporting that the change in government would not affect London's policy toward Ukraine. Since Russia's full-scale invasion began, the United Kingdom has committed £25 billion in military assistance, provided advanced weaponry, trained tens of thousands of Ukrainian service members, and continues expanding cooperation with Kyiv. That partnership is now entering a new phase. President Volodymyr Zelensky stated that Ukraine is prepared to share its own defense technology and manufacture drones in the United Kingdom, emphasizing that stronger defense cooperation benefits both Ukraine and its allies. During his visit to London, Zelensky described plans to build a major factory in Britain focused on new technologies while sharing Ukraine's battlefield experience with British partners. Rather than describing Ukraine as only a recipient of military support, the discussions presented it as an active contributor to future defense development. According to the data, both countries intend to continue expanding what Zelensky called the strongest partnership in the history of their bilateral relations. That cooperation produced an immediate practical result. President Zelensky and Prime Minister Andy Burnham met aboard the Royal Navy aircraft carrier HMS Queen Elizabeth during multinational exercises where discussions centered on strengthening Ukraine's defense capabilities and expanding joint weapons production. One outcome was London's decision to transfer production rights for the British Stone Cloak electronic warfare system to Ukraine. Roughly the size of a tablet computer, the system can be installed on drones to help them evade detection by Russian air defense systems. British officials stressed that this was not intended as a one-time transfer. Instead, they described it as part of a long-term defense partnership that would allow Ukraine to contribute directly to Britain's next generation of military technologies. The relationship is therefore evolving beyond weapons deliveries toward joint development and manufacturing. While Ukraine expands technological cooperation abroad, the economic picture presented for Russia moves in the opposite direction. According to Ukraine's Foreign Intelligence Service, Russia's stock market has now declined for 19 consecutive weeks, marking an extended period of uninterrupted losses. Businesses are reportedly responding by moving capital out of the country. Major business owners are said to be shifting investment portfolios toward cryptocurrencies, overseas real estate, and private investment funds instead of keeping their money tied to Russian markets. The data argues that this sustained decline is encouraging investors to search for alternatives outside the domestic financial system. The company-by-company figures paint the same picture. As of mid-July, shares in several of Russia's largest corporations had fallen sharply. Gazprom and VTB were each down by more than 21%. Norilsk Nickel had declined by 24%. Aeroflot was down by 27%. MTS had fallen by 28%. Even more dramatic was Russia's largest gold producer, Polyus, which reportedly lost 53% of its market value in just 2 weeks. According to analysts cited in the data, Russia's stock market has lost approximately 30% of its value since early April, falling back to levels last seen in 2016. The report further states that such a decline has not been recorded at any point since market statistics began in 1997. The comparison included in the information highlights how dramatically investment outcomes have diverged. An investor placing $1,000 into Apple shares at the beginning of 2006 would today have earned more than $130,000 in profit. The same investment in Gazprom shares, by contrast, would have produced a loss of more than $600. The comparison is presented to illustrate the long-term deterioration in shareholder value associated with one of Russia's largest companies, while capital increasingly seeks opportunities elsewhere. The financial pressure is now extending beyond stock prices. The Kremlin is described as facing growing budget constraints after asset seizures and tax increases. The next potential source of funding, according to the information, may be Russia's private pension savings. In June, Russia's finance ministry reportedly backed legislation that would transfer nearly $40 billion in pension assets into the state budget. During that same month, Communist Party leader Gennady Zyuganov urged Vladimir Putin to make use of an additional $2 trillion held by Russian companies and private citizens in bank accounts to help finance the budget. Together, these proposals indicate that policymakers are examining increasingly significant pools of domestic savings as potential funding sources. The economic consequences described in the data are also becoming increasingly visible in everyday life. Russians are paying greater attention to their own financial situations as economic conditions become more difficult. The report argues that concerns about household finances are gradually outweighing television messaging because the impact of the war is now reaching almost every household. As these pressures become more tangible, public perceptions are also changing. Rather than remaining an abstract issue, the economic effects are increasingly appearing in daily budgets and personal financial decisions. Healthcare has become another area affected by these financial pressures. According to Ukraine's Center for Countering Disinformation under the National Security and Defense Council, shrinking regional budgets have already forced funding reductions for hospitals and clinics across Russia. The report states that this process is accelerating as regional finances weaken while military spending remains at record levels. The Kremlin has reportedly advised regional authorities to optimize healthcare by closing smaller hospitals, shutting maternity wards, and postponing or canceling new medical construction projects. These measures suggest that budget pressures are no longer limited to financial markets, but are extending into public services relied upon by ordinary citizens. The information also points to growing difficulties across Russia's aviation sector. According to the material provided, the industry is deteriorating into what is described as a fleet of aircraft increasingly stripped for parts in order to remain operational. Presented alongside the continuing stock market decline, capital flight, pension proposals, and healthcare reductions, the aviation sector becomes another example of economic strain spreading across multiple industries rather than remaining isolated within financial markets alone. Officially, Britain's response has remained consistent despite its change in leadership. Prime Minister Andy Burnham pledged continued support for Ukraine, stating that Britain would keep pushing for a full and unconditional ceasefire while maintaining pressure through continued assistance. He emphasized that Ukraine could count on Britain's backing, while Zelensky responded that defense and security cooperation between the two countries had never been stronger. British officials also emphasized that technology transfers such as the Stonecloak system are intended to build long-term industrial cooperation instead of simply supplying equipment. According to the information provided, Ukraine is not only receiving advanced capabilities, but increasingly participating in their development and production. Taken together, the data outlines two sharply different trajectories. On one side, Ukraine is expanding defense partnerships, increasing technology sharing, and building joint manufacturing capacity with the United Kingdom. On the other, Russia is facing a 19th consecutive week of stock market decline, continued capital outflows, proposals to redirect private pension assets into the state budget, reductions in regional healthcare spending, and mounting pressure across major industries. Whether these trends continue will depend on developments beyond the information provided. But based strictly on the data presented here, the financial pressures facing Russia are no longer confined to market charts. They are extending into investment decisions, public spending, healthcare services, and the broader economy, while Ukraine's international defense partnerships continue moving toward deeper technological and industrial cooperation.